War, a horrific and disastrous event. Wars affect anything and everything. It wreaks chaos and havoc upon the world. People fighting for not only their country, but for their lives. Innocent people dying every single day. One of the most gruesome wars in history was World War II. During World War II, there were over 70 nations involved, but some of the major countries were the United States, Great Britain, Russia, Germany, Japan, and Italy. Initially, the United States did not want to get involved in the conflict overseas, but was a huge role in ending it. One man who contributed a huge amount of time, work, and effort to the United States' triumphant success was Julius Robert Oppenheimer. This remarkable man came into the world on April 22, 1904, as Julius Robert Oppenheimer. His parents, Julius and Ella, did not want him to be known as a junior, and therefore he was always called Robert. Robert's mother had another son, Louis, but he had died in infancy. After Louis's death, Ella became overly protective of Robert and would not let him buy from vendors, go to barbershops, or be around other kids for the fear of germs. Even as a young child, Robert was very fascinated by the matters of the mind, and when he was enrolled in the Ethical Culture School in 1911, he was more intrigued in his homework than making any friends with the other children. While in Germany, his grandfather gave Robert a rock collection in which he became very interested in the crystalline structure and the polarized light that came from it. By the time he was 12, he was writing to a few local geologists. One geologist nominated him for the New York Mineralogical Club and invited him to give the speech before the members. He pleaded his father to inform that they had invited a 12-year-old, but his father encouraged Robert to accept the honor. Oppenheimer agreed and gave the speech. In 1921, Robert had graduated from high school and was awarded a scholarship from Harvard, but refused, saying he could get along just fine without the money. Instead, Harvard decided to give Oppenheimer a volume of Galileo's earlier writings. He entered Harvard a year late due to an attack of colitis. To make up for his late beginning, Oppenheimer took 6 courses in each term. Robert was unsure of what he wanted to major in, so he took a variety of classes. He graduated in 1926 with a major in chemistry. After graduating, he traveled to Europe, where he went to work under J.J. Thomson at the Ernest Rutherford's Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. After Robert decided he would do better in theoretical physics than in experimental physics, Oppenheimer went to the University of Göttingen and studied under Professor Max Born. There, Oppenheimer was a swift, overexcited pupil and sometimes annoyed the other students. When Oppenheimer was at the young age of 22, he received his Ph.D. In September of 1927, he returned to Harvard as a young expert of mathematical physics. Robert left to study at the California Institute of Technology in 1928. He was offered many teaching positions and finally accepted a job as an assistant physics professor at the University of California, Berkeley. While at Berkeley, Robert had met Jean Tatlock, and they had gotten engaged after dating for 4 years. On September 20th, 1937, Robert's father, Julius, passed away, leaving him an inheritance of $300,000. Robert spent some of the money carelessly. Every time he saw Tatlock, Robert would give her a bouquet of flowers and an expensive gift. Oppenheimer's relationship with Jean had quickly disintegrated by the end of 1939, for Jean was fed up with all the gifts. In that same year, Robert had met Kitty Puning, and they had fallen in love. By the next year, on November 1st, 1940, Kitty and Robert were married. They had had their first child, Peter, on May 12, 1941. The United States began their work on the atomic bomb in fear that the Germans would develop one also and use it against the U.S., not realizing that Japan would bomb us first on December 7, 1941, at Pearl Harbor. In 1942, when Robert was 38 years old, he began his work on the atomic bomb. In November of that same year, he was appointed to the director of the fabrication of the bomb and the laboratory for design. Oppenheimer and his family then moved to the new bomb laboratory at Los Alamos, New Mexico. There he became the science director of the atomic bomb. Robert and his wife had their second child, a baby girl named Toni, on December 7, 1944. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m. Mountain War Time, the first atomic bomb test, codenamed Trinity, took place at Jornada del Morito. journey to death. Following the explosion, Oppenheimer recalled a passage from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita.
On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., the uranium atomic bomb, Little Boy, was detonated over Hiroshima, killing nearly 100,000 people and twice that from radiation. People who were less than 3 kilometers away were either burned to death, vaporized, suffered from mutations or cancer, their skin was melted off their bodies, or their eyeballs had been turned to liquid. 3 days later, the plutonium atomic bomb, Fat Man, was dropped over Nagasaki, killing 35,000. The Japanese also had a very difficult time in trying to find their loved ones and friends after the bombs and did not know if they were dead or alive until many weeks after. These bombs were dropped in retaliations for bombing Pearl Harbor. On September 2, 1945, Japan had officially surrendered, ending World War II. Even though winning World War II was a huge triumph for Oppenheimer as well as the U.S., Oppenheimer still mourned the deaths of the innocent people and of the suffering that the Japanese were going through. Once the war was over, he became known as the father of the atomic bomb. In that same year, Robert had resigned from the Los Alamos laboratory in the October of 1945, and he moved to Pasadena to resume teaching. He funded the American School of Theoretical Physics at the University of California, Berkeley. On March 4, 1946, Oppenheimer received the U.S. Medal for Merit for his work on the atomic bomb. Robert then became the director of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton in 1947 and was elected chairman of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. A few years later, on December 23, 1953, the government had suspended Robert's security clearance from the Atomic Energy Commission, for he was under investigation for being a communist. In April through May of the next year, Oppenheimer had hearings before the Atomic Energy Commission's Personal Security Board, which consisted of 3 men that decided on his eligibility for clearance. He was voted 2-1 that his security clearance should not be given back. Gordon Gray, who headed the board, said that Robert was a security risk, and Thomas Morgan agreed with him. It was Dr. Ward Evans, a chemistry professor, who disagreed and thought Oppenheimer should have the clearance returned to him. Robert's clearance was officially taken away on June 29, 1954. Oppenheimer and his family went to St. John at the Virgin Islands after his hearing, for his reputation had been destroyed, but he still continued to lecture, write, and work in physics. On December 2, 1963, he received the Enrico Fermi Award and $50,000 from President Lyndon B. Johnson. In 1966, Robert went to see a doctor in New York, for his cough from being a smoker had become increasingly worse, and was diagnosed with throat cancer. Robert decided that he would try radiation therapy, but came to find out it had done nothing for him. This ingenious man, who did so much for our country's triumphant technology, passed away on February 18, 1967.